So my name's Patty Hagan, and I'm the president and executive director of T-Rex, which is right down the street. I hope you came to our party last night. It was fun. And we're really thrilled to be here and to welcome the geospatial community to St. Louis. And I'm really honored to be here with several new friends of mine and one older friend of mine, young friend, but old friend to me, who are all involved in geospatial startups. And so we're going to talk about what that means for them and how they've been able to build their business and what's next. So I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce himself, herself, and talk about your background and how you came to start a business, and then tell us a little bit about your business as well. So go ahead and talk a little bit about where you're coming from and what you do in your business. So we'll start with you, Dan.
It does help to turn it on. Thanks, Patty. So I'm Dan Custer, founder CEO of a company, Cambrio. We build powerful data flow automation, which means we enable programming around programs and then offload this into the cloud. So for people who are trying to prototype capability, and you have many data sources, many AI machine learning models, many outputs and analysts you're trying to engage with, that's a lot of complexity. We optimize through that. Maybe we pass through and introduce and then come back for how we got here? Okay.
Hi, my name is Pat. I'm with DriftNet Securities, and I'm actually the director for GIS Solutions. So I actually joined DriftNet Securities about 2 years into their startup venture and brought some added value to their processes through adding geospatial tech.
Hi, I'm Michael Neighbor. I am the founder of Submerse. Submerse creates synthetic data for AI and computer vision model training. Right now, there's this huge bottleneck in AI, which is the collection and labeling of training data. And we flip the script by computer generating pictures that are fully labeled, ready to go for machine learning.
Okay, friends, so that you told us about your companies. So now tell us a little bit about your background. So what brought you to the role that you're in right now?
Yeah, so actually that's a great transition. So like Michael said, there are bottlenecks in this process, and the reason I think some of these bottlenecks exist is because there's newly developed capability. There's also two new dynamics that are super important, right? One is the advent of cloud computing, so that the upfront cost of being able to engage on a heavy compute problem has actually been lowered significantly. The other would be open communities, for collaborating, sharing, software and data. So we're very interested in this. It's kind of a chicken or the egg problem. You have to have capability to motivate people to work with you and to share what they have and collaborate. On the flip side, somebody has to create that, right? So I and Cambrio are very interested in the open data ecosystem. We actually use our tools to provide a large amount of open data back to the community, including some of the stuff you may have seen around the booths today or previously this week. So things like object detection from overhead imagery, classification and detection of vessels on the ocean, pre versus post change detection visually. And these are things that are all bottlenecked on analyst attention right now, and that we can disrupt this with computer vision. But you still need the complete loop from end to end, right? You need to start with the problem in mind, which means you need to start with the analyst in mind. And then you have to work backwards for where the bottleneck is and how you're going to innovate at each of those steps. The gaps at each of those steps motivated the creation of Cambrio. And this is what we do today, right? We work through that pipeline to get everything connected and put feedback loops around it.
Before we move on, let me ask you this, Dan, because I want to ask our other panelists the same question. What made you, as you looked at that landscape, what made you say, I, Dan, want to try to take care of this problem, and I want to do it and start a business doing it?
Yeah. What was my personal motivation? I think was actually, I believe that there was some technical leverage and also there's a lot of things a person can do in the world, and if you personally don't do it, somebody else will. What if you believe that there's something you uniquely can add? Then sometimes you have to prove it. And so what motivated me to start Cambrio and to do this is I believed we had something unique that we could do, and we were going to be the people who do it. Yeah.
That's great. That's great. And Pat, how about you?
So my story is a little different, I guess, because I'm not the founder or CEO of the company, but I'm privileged to work with both of them, both the founders and the CEO on a continuous basis. And the reason for DriftNet coming about was actually Parkland. We realized that there was an actual gap in the security system that schools have and other soft targets have, mainly because they haven't been updated, and we have the technology to do so, and with that comes the responsibility to do so as well. So it wasn't so much on who's going to do it, but when is it going to happen and why hasn't it happened already? So Aaron, the CEO, was adamant about just getting it going and started, and he dedicated himself about a year to getting the product ready and launching it and fully working through the processes. Then there was Brigitte, who also came about, and she's our chief of operations, and she kind of started assembling a team because regardless of what anybody says, startups, it's a team effort, it's a community effort. You can't do everything yourself. Our CEO is really, really smart, and he's a systems engineer. So we used what he had come up with, which was this great hardware and part of the software in order to continue leveraging and producing a suite of systems that will actually be able to protect schools. And we're proud to be in a lot of schools in the country right now, and we're working with a lot of school districts to make sure that they're safe, not only for COVID, but also for school shootings and other potential attackers that people don't normally see, such as what happened in Flint with the water. So we're using all the technology that we're putting in other industries and actually putting it back to schools, where we have the greatest asset that we can ever have, which is the next community.
Pat, we work with a lot of startups at T-Rex, and one of the things that I noticed that really means a lot to me personally is that there are so many startups who do have, even though they're for-profit organizations, they really are very mission-oriented in their approach as well. And you and Dan have already talked about that in your work too. So, Michael, how about you? What brought you to start your new business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I graduated from USC in Los Angeles, and during my master's program in spatial economics and data analysis, I encountered this problem firsthand of trying to find labeled data that can be used to train a computer vision model. And the data just didn't really exist. And then even in cases that it did exist, it takes a really long time to annotate and prepare this data for the machine learning algorithm. And so it was really out of that idea came this synthetic data approach, because computer graphics technology has increased so exponentially in the past decade that it's just an obvious solution to this data bottleneck. And so I think the combination of it being such an obvious problem and an obvious solution with no one really connecting the two is what made me very interested to go pursue it. And that was the foundation of SMERS.
So, Michael, it really does echo this thing that we hear all the time in the world that I'm operate in, is that there's a problem and no one had the solution, and as Dan described and Pat's described, you go after the solution, and from that comes your new business idea. So it's really a lot of fun too, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Really rewarding. So you're brand new in business, and you guys have been around a little bit longer. What are some of the challenges that you've faced in that sort of brand new endeavor, Michael? It'll be a little different for, across the board here, but, just starting out like this, what are some of the major challenges that you've encountered?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So I graduated just in this past May, And so one of the challenges we faced is that some people don't think we're like as serious of a company as I like to think that we are. And so being able to bridge that gap has been interesting. But by and large, I think people are really open to new technologies and new ideas. And if a company or an organization is able to bring new technology to the table, I mean, people will listen regardless of who's presenting. So I've been fortunate that we've had a lot of success so far. Fingers crossed, and it'll continue.
So, same question to you, Pat. What are some of the challenges that you've faced in the role, you can speak to it from a company perspective as well.
So I think it's scaling, right? We are selling a lot. We're selling our hardware, we're selling our software, the suite, the services that we do. It's a very complete service, and we make it affordable, so schools can actually afford it, and they don't have to choose between, having a football team or having security. And the issue with that is, oh crap, COVID happened, and all of a sudden, a lot of resources that had come from other places all of a sudden get cut off. So what did we do? We had to pivot. We had to make it so we're all American made, and we had to literally make sure that we were manufacturing our hardware in-house, so we didn't have to rely on other venues. And the other part is, now that we're manufacturing, we also have to train the people that are putting all these things together. So scaling has been one of those things. Hiring for talent, people that want to work in the industry that we're on, that want to be continuously challenged and understand that they're going to be challenged, and it's not going to be, every day is not going to be easy. And working hard, sometimes the generation that I'm in believes that, I hate to say it like this, but that we're entitled to a lot of things, and the truth is that we're entitled to nothing. We work for everything we have. And that's the hard part, is telling someone that, no, today we have to work a few more hours because this needs to be fixed today. Security doesn't wait for anyone. And unfortunately, that's one of those things that teaching someone that's coming straight out of college or teaching somebody that's coming straight out of high school may not necessarily be kosher with them at the very beginning, but as they kind of evolve and learn about the mission and learn about the people that they're affecting and the communities that they're in, all of a sudden they realize how important their contribution really is. And I think scaling both with partners in the communities such as the Chicago City, City of Commerce, DPI, and a couple other people has really been key to the success of DriftNet.
Yeah, I want to follow up with some more discussion about entrepreneurial support organizations and help that new businesses can get. But let me ask Dan, what have been some of your major challenges, maybe of late, or I'm sure you've had challenges throughout, but maybe of late. Let's start there.
Yeah, challenge level is high. So I'm hiring. If y'all are interested, talk to me. That's by far the biggest challenge. There's currently a massive talent gap for people who can stretch across this entire technical spectrum. We're fortunate in this industry that the world is a big place. There's lots of very fine-grained problems, and there's an influx of data to address these problems. So the upstream is there, and the downstream is there, and there are gaps in the middle. So if solving through those gaps is interesting to you, talk to me. I'd love to hear from you. On the flip side, as a more kind of meta level challenge, there's a kind of underlying thing that goes along with this talent gap, which is training and increasing, raising the tide of capability across the industry. The reason I think this is really a major challenge is investing in that rising tide means you might not actually capture all of it, and that's okay. Right? So especially for smaller organizations like a startup or entrenched organizations like major corporations have been around for some time, that seems a little bit odd, right? And I think that the leverage that actually makes this work is it's just incredibly productive to share some of this in the open. It's good for training. It's good for proving capability. Put up or shut up. If you think you're really good at predicting this stuff, show it. right? You have to have some place to show that. You have to have some common benchmark on which you can prove this, right? And so these all tie together. But yeah, there's a talent gap. There are a number of technical bottlenecks, right? And there's this kind of end-to-end capability, which is always the challenge. So yeah, talk to me if you're interested in any of those.
Yeah, I want to emphasize just for a second how important entrepreneurship is to our country. Most new jobs in the U.S. are created by startups and small businesses. It's not job creation at the large corporate level. And so to have a healthy economy and to do well in terms of innovation in our country, it's so important to support small businesses and to support startup activity so that communities and economies can be healthy and grow and offer opportunities for young people like these wonderful people up here to try and test out new ideas. It's so important for our country. So there's a lot of entrepreneurial support in communities across the nation for startups, for innovators. That's one of the things we do at T-REX is provide that culture and resources for support. So I'm curious about the kinds of resources that you all may have taken advantage of in the past or that you may be taking advantage of now. I know Dan is a part of the NGA Accelerator. So anything, and Michael too, right? So, so these are things that are important programs and resources that we need to establish as communities for the good of our country and the good of our cities and states and so forth. But we need to grow them even more. There's not enough, right? So, Michael, let's start with you. How about, have you taken advantage of any of these resources that are provided in the community, or maybe even talk a little bit about the NGA Accelerator?
Yeah, so mentorship and entrepreneurial support is absolutely critical, and it's been critical for me in Submerse. And we definitely wouldn't be where we are today, and we wouldn't be able to progress a lot further without having a network of people around us who are coming from different areas. So we have technical advisors, we have strategic advisors, we just have friends of the company who have been really supportive, even if it's not a formal relationship. And then we have great organizations like NGA, Arch Grants, T-REX that are able to help support us as well. And I think for any entrepreneur, having those kinds of resources available is extremely important, because nobody just wakes up and is able to start a company and hire people and solve problems on their own. They need guidance, they need mentorship, and they need resources. And so we've been extremely fortunate to have access to some of those things. But I absolutely think there's a bigger need for more resources for all kinds of businesses.
Agreed. Pat, you have any comment about that?
Yeah, so you guys are all from St. Louis. I'm proud to be from DC, but I'm currently living in Chicago. So I've learned to adopt my new community, and thanks to my new community, I've also been able to be successful in the hiring process and kind of helping with the educational gap that some people may have. There's a lot of people that need jobs right now. And the issue with that, they might not necessarily have the training that they need for new and emerging technology, but they're not necessarily going to learn that in school either, because they're not teaching the new emerging technology at school. So thanks to the city colleges in Chicago, we've been able to partner with them to kind of help with their what they're teaching in school, provide internships, and provide apprenticeship programs that literally feed into our company and allow us to continue scaling up. Because that is the hardest part, is the hiring process. I think there was a point where I interviewed about 200 different people for one position. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it is the most painful thing I've ever done. In reality, it's that there is a problem with the education, specifically for emerging technology. And it's one of the responsibilities of both startups and the community that we're part of to kind of bridge that gap so we can help that community stay strong in that tech field and continue moving forward instead of just staying stagnant and having that talent that is there leave to go somewhere else.
It's both an opportunity and a challenge, right? We have so many people who need and want good jobs, and we have so many people who need people to work for them, well-trained people, and we've got to figure out a way to bridge that gap. It's a really important point. How about you, Dan?
Yeah, so I think the saying is it takes a village to raise a child, right? And this has definitely been true. One of the interesting aspects of this for me actually is, so I grew up in Iowa, and if you want to have a good harvest, you plant a lot of seeds. And some of those seeds you have to nurture for some time, and you can't get too upset when a bird eats your favorite tomato. So, which happens to us a lot this season at home. So, I think that's kind of a good metaphor for what my journey has been throughout this, right? You plant a lot of seeds, you nurture the ones that you're very interested in. You're not going to be able to nurture them all. And so you have to invite people in as well to share in this entire process, right? And so I think that there's kind of two entrepreneurial challenges there, right? One is make sure you survive long enough to benefit from some harvest so you can plant a bigger one next planting season, right? And then the second would be, you can't hold too tightly onto any particular seed. It's very difficult to predict where technology trends are going to go in the AI machine learning space, in data generation, right? Like walking around the symposium this week, it's changing extremely rapidly, and staying ahead of this is not something any single organization can do, I think, even a massive one. And so a rate of change is a huge challenge, and I think the best way to kind of stay connected through rate of change is you have openness on the inside and the outside, right? You're open to source things in and collaborate. You're also open to give things out and enable, where you might not necessarily have a lock on value capture, but it's going to have that rising tide effect for everybody in the industry.
So true. So, as agile thinkers, agile young thinkers, with your working in startup businesses, as you look around the geospatial community and in the work that you've been doing in your own work or in your own businesses, where do you see opportunities in the future for new business development in the geospatial world? Have you been? It's kind of a surprise question, but as you're thinking about where opportunities will exist for startup activity, where do you think those focus areas will be? Dan, you want to take a shot at that?
Oh, I'm all over this one. So in the geospatial community, there's been a historical imperative to understand where your data come from and where your capability come from. So assurance, right? This has to change. And we heard this in the keynotes, right? NGA, for example, has committed to openness, right? To doing things in unclassified space, sharing data more openly, and engaging more openly with industry. It has to be this way for velocity, right? Like, it's the only way to be able to do this, like I said, right? Like, you've got openness from the inside out and the outside in. And to me, this is a big shift, and also an absolutely necessary one.
So let me do a follow-up to that. So how does an organization such as NGA that has a need to have classified level information as well, how do they jump back and forth between the unclassified practice or sandbox back into classified? That's kind of hard, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think that there's this opportunity for dual use technology. This would be, so we do this. There are some problems which you can show capability on in an open benefits the world scenario. For us, the example for this is humanitarian and natural disaster work, right? So there are, and if you're interested in some open data on this and engaging, come talk to me, and I'll give you a link to some free data you can get that proves this true. The capability is a key piece, but you can demonstrate that capability historically. You can demonstrate it on an open problem set or an open data set, and you can do it on an adjacent data set as well, right? So an example of this might be something like, if you want to understand the damage that has happened after an attack, you could also look at the damage that's happened after a hurricane, right? And so the problem sets align, and there's an unambiguous public good component to something like understanding damage around the world from a hurricane. Nobody can cause hurricanes, right? So there's no risk of this. So I think that's a great example, actually, of how do you both be open on these kinds of things, but also how do you work in the open and show that you have the capability. Counterintuitively, one might suspect that having a scope that could include the high side means that you have higher capability. I'm not sure this is true. I actually think that the higher capability comes from faster iteration, and faster iteration right now is probably more enabled by this open collaboration pattern and open data sets, right? Both for training and also moving through into, how do you collaborate with academia as a startup or as a government agency or as, an industry player? The best way to do this is to do it in the open and to do it, where you can actually share freely back and forth. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Michael, I'm going to ask you, as you're looking around the landscape and you're thinking about your own business, what are things that you think that you might go for, and you don't have to reveal any of your secret sauce, but just focus areas that you think might be important moves in the future for startup activity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we're evaluating the different areas that we want to focus on, one of the things that Submerse really prioritizes is areas where there's not a lot of red tape, because nothing kills creativity faster than like bureaucracy and red tape, just kind of putting you in a box and limiting what solutions you can come up with. And so I would recommend that larger organizations that want to work closer with startups, like, just reduce the red tape, because startups don't have the resources to navigate incredibly complex processes. And so we focus on more of the open field problems where we have the most freedom and creativity to maneuver around and come up with unique solutions, and then go deliver and distribute those solutions to end customers. And that's just a really critical thing for us, and I imagine it's very critical for a lot of other startups.
So that's a really important point, the red tape problem. It really is a problem, right? Both in corporate and government, especially government. Trying to get a government contract as a small business or as a startup especially can be really difficult, can't it? So, Pat, do you have any thoughts about any of this?
I have a lot of thoughts on this, but one of the main ones is probably that's been touched based on both Michael and Dan has been data validation. I think data transparency is such a big deal for both natural disasters and man-made disasters, and the kind of field that I'm in, which is security, generally involves in knowing things before other people know things. The problem with that is APIs and a couple other things that might be really useful and give a little bit more of a view for the people that are on the ground, like first responders, would be really useful. But the way that you get them is through a lot of red tape. And unfortunately, that creates a blind side for security. The other part of it is the data validation. Not all data that is out there is actually legit data or clean data. Fortunately, I've had the unfortunate opportunity to actually go out and validate a lot of data sets out there that the government has put out and has been put out by a lot of different organizations that has been used in papers and research and case studies. And going back and dedicating myself into actually cleaning up that data has been one of those things that I realized that people are doing research on some data that might be flawed or not necessarily validated to the point where it needs to be in order to make case samples. And that is a big issue with security, because you're not getting the full picture. So a little less red tape would be nice, a little more transparency on how some of the processes are getting out there for the data that is out there would be also really nice.
Yeah, and that's a great entree for you to talk about data and the kinds of data sets that you guys can put together for sandbox kinds of operations. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's so you need a people, place, and a practice, right? So as T-Rex and Geosaurus and the Moonshot Labs there's three great examples for St. Louis places, right? Why do you need a place? It could be virtual as well, right? Or computational even. You need people to do the work, and you need a practice for how you do it and show this capability. And that people, place, and practice pattern, I think, is actually really strong. So very excited with some of the stuff that's happened. The new agreements that have been signed for Geosaurus, for collaboration, is setting up some of these sandboxes where you can bring in data, show capability on a particular dimension, right, and do this in the open. I think is a wonderful piece for that, right? So that gives you place. Also gives you people, because the place and the resources draw people in, right? So very excited to see where this goes. And then the practice, of course, is always evolving, right? But you show it by doing it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Michael, did you have any trouble getting good data sets? I mean, Pat makes a really good point. When you were developing the company, did you have the resources that you needed to practice and innovate on good data sets?
Yeah, that is a big challenge for us. So what we do is we create data sets. We create computer-generated synthetic data. But one of our biggest challenges is evaluating models trained on that synthetic data against some real data. And I think that's exactly one of the challenges we have is if there's no evaluation set of real data, it's hard to know empirically how your synthetic data is performing. And so being able to have some real world validation is incredibly important.
And Pat, any thoughts about that as well?
I think there's a lot to be learned from historical data, and the problem with that is what he's saying is when you're trying to make synthetic data doesn't mean it's fake. It means that it comes from somewhere, and that somewhere needs to be reliable. So the issue with the red tape, again, with Dan and Michael, like, we can't make good synthetic data if we don't have good historical data. So it's a catch-22.
So true. Okay, so now I'm going to get personal, okay? What is the most rewarding thing about having your own business? And I know, Pat, I know you're part of it,
just
but
there.
you're a startup though still. But what feels good about doing it? Dan, we'll start with you.
It's really hard to pick one.
Well, you don't have to pick one.
So for me, I think it actually comes down to community. So it's been a few years now, so enough that I've seen some seeds bear fruit, and seeing this happen autonomously without me having to be hands-on has been extremely rewarding, right? There's something we did that had a side effect in the community, and then somebody else was able to benefit from that and then develop their own thing, which feeds back into the community. It becomes this super linear kind of virtuous cycle. Love it.
That's cool. I love that. How about you, Pat?
Well, I have two. So I'm the director of my department right now, and I think in other places I would have had to wait like 10 to 20 years to even be that high up. But luckily, I've had the opportunity to grow and kind of go up the chain real fast. The other part of it is the mentoring. I got to be mentored, and I get to mentor. I started with somebody that came from a political science major and didn't know anything about game development or GIS or anything like that. And in the middle of 6 months, I had to train him how to do what I could do. And he by far does it a lot better sometimes than I can because he has such attention to detail. And it's been such a rewarding experience just watching him grow, because he might have never come up into GIS if I had not introduced him to it or had accidentally pressured him into it. But that's such a rewarding experience, and I think the growth in people, and I think that's why startups are so different, because you invest in the people in your startup. You're not just investing on Johnny there because he's going to push a couple buttons and then go home, but you're investing on someone there that is going to grow with your company, and it's going to hopefully be there in the next 5 years and hopefully take on those reins and continue going forward, because we're not making a startup to just be there for a couple of years, but hopefully a lifetime.
How about you, Michael?
I enjoy how undefined the path is. So like we're at point A, and I know we need to get to point B, but there's no one telling me how to get there. There's no well-trodden road that you should take. It's kind of up to us to figure out how to get to the next milestone. And so I think there's a lot of like creativity and freedom in that, which makes this startup route really appealing to me.
I find most people involved in startups love that creative outlet, using their creative energy, and they love to be able to try things. There's a natural curiosity about discovering things, and so it's very rewarding, I think, to your point, Michael, about figuring things out and figuring out a problem and what's next, and doing that on your own or with great colleagues, right? So That's great, you guys. Are there any questions that we have in the audience right now? Oh, okay. Don't want to leave those out. Thanks, Camelia. Okay. So, okay, this is for everybody. Considering this panel focuses on the generational shift, do you guys mind sharing your ages? Oh my goodness. Okay, how about range if you don't want to? I'm old, so I'm 60. So how about you?
Believe it or not, I'm 18 years old.
That's really funny.
I'm 41.
So my CEO is actually 23. I'm 32.
I'm 23.
Love it. Isn't that exciting?
He could
to
be
have
my
these
CEO.
wonderful young people. I love it, love it, love it.
Actually, so there's an interesting subtext to this. There are a lot of assumptions about what is involved in the startup journey. I have 2 children, and it's not easy. But nothing about a startup is easy, and nothing about parenting is easy. So, lots of joy on both sides. And that's not to say that any particular journey is right or wrong, right? Like, there's a lot of paths for this, and I think that it's more accessible now than it's ever been. One of the things during COVID that we've learned is that flexibility has a lot of extra dividends that people previously didn't necessarily recognize. So the flexibility of a startup is a major advantage if you're trying to bear a heavy load with things like, young children in a startup. Yeah. So these paths are more viable than it might seem, right?
One observation, and this is sort of as a result of COVID and then a little bit prior to that as well, as we're talking about the talent gap, what we're noticing at T-Rex is that there is this, constant change of people are getting hired by a company and then they move to the next company, they move to the next. So great demand for advanced IT technologists and developers and so forth. And sometimes what spurs entrepreneurship in an unfortunate way, I guess, is when the economy is not good or when there are layoffs. And that's when people sometimes will start businesses when there are layoffs in these kinds of fields. And right now, we are in a cycle in terms of technologists where technologists are in demand. And so entrepreneurship is I'm feeling this, I haven't seen numbers yet, but I feel like it's a little stalled in these areas. So I'm hopeful that we can find ways to encourage entrepreneurship while still having these a healthy economy around technology. And I think that one of the ways we need to do that is by supporting entrepreneurship and startups and encouraging people to try this as a potential goal for themselves. So that's just kind of a side comment. I don't know if you guys are noticing the same thing in your worlds. Yep.
Well,
yeah, Pat, go
it's
ahead.
kind of interesting that you mentioned that because so I work right now for DriftNet Securities, right? But my boss knew that there was upon a time I did start my own startup and it failed terribly because I didn't know anything about business. So one of the things that they've done is actually start like a business leadership track where they actually pay for courses for me to actually learn about business because their hopes is that sooner or later I'll become my own startup and do my own thing. And I think that's kind of one of those really weird things because startups make other startups. There is a gap. Like you have to choose an identity sooner or later, and I've been told that a couple times, of what your startup is going to do. And fortunately, he's 23. He'll probably have a couple people out of his company sooner or later that will make their own startup because they've seen that he could do it. And the same thing with Daniel, there'll be somebody from your company that will sooner or later make their own company because you could do it. And I think that's kind of the difference between startups. It's not so much of a just one world view of I have to be there the whole time, but the fact that there is a growth process that you're someone needs you there, but you don't have to stay there.
Kudos to your company for doing that. That's terrific. That's
they're great.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. All right, we have another question, and I'm watching the time, I promise, my friends. Okay. This is a great question. I want to get to this. And this is for all of you, okay, what can government and or large businesses do to better partner with your company and other startups? We talked a little bit about red tape. Are there we said reduce red tape, but are there positive programs or directions that you've seen or experienced or thought of that you could recommend to some of our larger corporate partners and government partners?
You can go.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, so I'd say number one's the red tape thing. Number two is like put money behind it. That's like, we talk with a lot of larger companies, and talking with companies is great and having conversations. But when a larger company puts money behind it, it really allows us to dedicate resources to building something for them and strengthening that partnership. And for a large company, it's not necessarily as much money relative to their size.
Yeah.
But for a small company, like even like a $50,000 grant is huge and
Yeah.
very impactful. So if a larger company wants to engage more with startups and is willing to put resources and money behind it, that's by far the best way that they can engage, and then reduce the red tape that goes along with that money behind proof of concepts and other projects.
Yeah, and I want to stick up for you a little bit more on that. Don't lowball the startups. Pay a fair price to the startups. So, amen, brother. Okay. Pat, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we've had the privilege of knowing a lot of people in the school systems already, the ones that we're in and whatnot. But other school districts, be open to change. Technology is changing, and if you're not open to it, you're going to stay in a very, very dark cave, and that's not where we need to be. So just kind of be open for change. I think in the government, one of the things that I've always heard, and I was in the military, so we've always done it this way. Maybe that way it worked then, but it may not work now.
Yeah.
So just be open to change.
Yeah. Dan, how about you?
Oh, I love this one. So if you think you're a leader in an area, put it up. Share your data, engage with the community, get it out in the open. There is a vigorously growing open data community and open source community around a lot of these problems, increasingly so in geospatial. If you don't know how to get involved in that, just come talk to me and I'd be happy to connect you. I'll give you free data, I'll point you to some really interesting problems, and I'll connect you with other people who care. And so if you are the leader, you benefit more than anybody from being able to take all the other people who want to lead with you, right? And so, being fortunate as we are to be in the center of the United States right now, undisputed heavyweight champ of technology development. If we want that to continue, we have to act like that, which means leading and being open and investing in this long-term play, because we're going to be around to benefit. Yep.
Yeah, and I would add one more thing. I would tell corporate and government partners to be open to being the first customer. Startups need a first customer, and if you're willing to make that leap and work with a startup, you can really encourage them to move forward. So we talked a little bit about that too. So, all right, guys, I think we're right at our time. So, okay, good. Are there any other questions in the audience? Okay, how about you guys? How about advice for people thinking about starting up? Quick advice.
Yeah, Dan, how did you do it?
If you know you can do it, do it. If you don't, don't. But seriously, don't take a leap before you look. You need to know that this is your jam and that you have some particular leverage. If you don't have that yet, but you have the desire to start something, go earn some really specific, really potent leverage on something, right? It's better to be really strong on one thing. You'll be able to find somebody who needs that thing, right? Being diffused on a bunch of other stuff is not a good play for being able to start a new thing.
Cool. Thanks, Dan. How about you, Michael?
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is "Screw it, let's do it" by Richard Branson, and so I'd recommend just do it, even if it's a like a side hustle or a little project that you can test the waters a little bit. Obviously, what Dan says, you want to learn more about the problem you're solving and whether there's a need for it. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs, albeit in my limited experience, give up too early. When if they keep pushing through, they'll be able to succeed, or at least get to a point where it's a significant milestone and they can use that experience for their next role. So yeah, screw it, let's do it for whatever project it is.
Yeah, and I want to turn to Pat because Pat and I talked a little bit about this. She mentioned that she had a business that failed, and at T-Rex we don't think of those as failures because those are trials, and you learn from it every time. So Pat, do you want to just say one more thing about that, and then I think we're out of time.
Well,
Okay.
I learned a lot from that experience, so I don't count it as a failure. It's just a simple way of saying that it didn't go well, you know. But the other part of it is the person that is coming into a startup. You know, these guys need support. Um, it's it's a community. So if you're looking at going and quitting your job and joining a startup, do it. You never know. Like, go along for the ride. It's gonna be a wild one, but it's definitely worth it.
It's fun, isn't it?
Oh,
I
yeah.
love it. Yep. Well, thanks, you guys. We really appreciate it. And thanks to the audience. Thanks for your great questions.